Hey you. Yeah, you. Do you like suffering? Do you like revenge stories? Do you like the term hooch? Do you like lasagna? If so, I got a short show to take up a day or 91 of your time. It's called 91 Days. So for me, this is one of those shows like Violet Evergarden that's weirdly perfectly suited to all of my tastes. Like they just read through my Mal stores and then based the premise off what I rated highly. Japanese-made show set in a western city, revenge story, protagonist that gets things done but also has believable flaws and issues, and a great soundtrack by the same composer as Death Parade and Shinsekai Yori. Watching this show is like a train wreck, but in a good way, and not a good bad way either, like Violence Jack or Stool Days, but in the, oh, this character is sprinting headfirst into a pointless death, but I want to see how it happens, sort of way. It's always strange how a show can have literally nobody in it end up happy, yet somehow the end doesn't feel as pessimistic as you might think. 91 Days is the story of Angelo Ladouce as he joins the Venetti family mob to tear them apart from the inside and get revenge on the Don for betraying his dad and murdering his family. It's sort of reminiscent of a grittier, more traditionally paced Bacano, though if I were to compare the story and tone, it feels more like a Japanese take on movies like The Godfather or Goodfellas. Even the more cheerful and upbeat moments are orchestrated with a very bittersweet tone in the background, always reminding you of what's inevitable. Even if the overall plot isn't particularly surprising and tends to be pretty par for the course with this kind of series, it manages to be unique and entertaining in a way that I can rewatch whenever and never be bored with it. I've actually seen it 3 times now and I've enjoyed it more and more each time, and each time I've heard different interpretations about certain parts from each person I watched it with. The very early episodes can drag on a little bit, but even then the setting alone is enough to keep me invested. Characters act realistically, but not necessarily in the right way, if that made sense. Even when characters make poor choices, it's hard to be mad at them because the show does a great job of establishing their individual flaws. And by the end, you genuinely empathize with nearly everyone. And there's always a kind of morbid humor that's very un-Japanese when you compare it to the sense of humor that you very often see in anime. The message and morality of the show also tends to deviate quite a bit from traditional Japanese ideals, which can be very interesting, especially for an anime. It's a story that's not particularly original and has been done a lot, but it's a fantastic execution of that idea. It smooths out and polishes ideas that have been done before rather than trying to come up with a twist to turn everything around. And I think I'm fine with that. The ending is either just as bleak or less bleak than expected, depending on how you looked at it, but it's a show that I really think could have been considered more of a classic in time, but unfortunately it's just part of a subgenre that doesn't get a lot of attention since there's probably not a lot of overlap between Prohibition-era organized crime fans and anime fans. I have similar feelings towards Bacano, though if I had to say, that's gotten a little more attention in the general community due to its relation to Durarara, which is much more in line with regular anime content, even if it is still very well written. I've gone back and forth a lot on whether or not I even want to review this show. It's not a masterpiece and it's not generic either. It's a show that drew in a very specific crowd and not much beyond those audiences. It's got its obvious flaws and some admittedly kinda sloppy methods of getting its message across in the end, and that can ruin it for some people. You can guess a lot of its points just from being familiar with the movies it takes inspiration from, but it's the delivery and execution that makes me enjoy it every time I watch it, along with something very different about seeing a Japanese take on this kind of thing. Every character feels very tightly written, like they were all made with others explicitly in mind, and in the end the characters all fit together like a bunch of pieces to make up a bigger point in detail that can often go underappreciated. And while sure it's not the best cast of characters in anime, it's a story that I do enjoy coming back to. It's not perfect, but it's nowhere near bad either. And normally I tend to avoid reviewing shows that are just good, but this is sort of an uncommon show in the industry that's gotten surprisingly little attention over the years for just how good it is. Not to mention the very unique but also very satisfying soundtrack. I've never been good at describing music, but suffice to say, this is one that I listen to a lot, and every time I do, without fail, I feel disappointed that this show didn't get more attention. So should you watch it? Yeah. At least if all this sounds interesting, then I do highly recommend giving it a shot.